12 ancient structures hidden beneath Australia, and why they were sealed beneath the sunburnt plains of Australia. There is another country. It does not appear on any tourist map, and most people driving overhead have no idea it exists. Cracks in red rock lead down into black stone hallways. Sinkholes hide chambers older than the pyramids. Limestone systems wind for kilometres under towns where children play soccer without ever knowing what lies 20 metres beneath their feet. Some of these places are open to the public, walked through by tour guides with headlamps and safety briefings, but others are not. Gates are welded shut. Access roads are deliberately left off maps. Rangers give vague answers when asked why a particular chamber has been closed for 50 years. Officially, the reasons are always the same: unstable rock, protected species, cultural sensitivity, and in most cases, that really is the whole story. But in a few cases, the paper trail gets strange. Surveys get cut short. Recommendations for further study vanish into filing cabinets. And local communities, who have lived beside these caves for tens of thousands of years, tell a story that does not always match the official one. This continent has been occupied continuously for at least 65,000 years. Longer than any other place on Earth has hosted the same connected human culture without interruption. That number matters because it means Australia's underground record is not just geology, it is also memory, encoded in law and language long before anyone thought to write anything down on paper. Some of what follows is confirmed by government records. Some of it is confirmed by nothing more than a caver's old notebook and a story passed down at the mouth of a closed gate. Today, we are going underground. 12 ancient structures hidden beneath Australian soil, and the real reasons, official and otherwise, that each one was sealed. Before we go underground, quick note: if cave systems, lost history, and the stranger corners of Australian geology are your thing, subscribing costs nothing, and it means you won't miss the next one. Right then, headlamps strapped on tight. Let's go on under. Structure number 1. Koonalda Cave, Nullarbor Plain, South Australia. 20,000 years ago, people crawled nearly 2 kilometres into pitch darkness here, carrying nothing but burning bundles of grass, to mine flint from the cave walls by touch and by the dim orange light of their torches. They left behind finger markings on the soft cave walls, deliberate patterns pressed into the surface by human hands, among the oldest confirmed art in the world. For decades, cavers explored freely. Then, in the 1970s, researchers realised that every visitor's breath and body heat was changing the humidity of the cave, and that the finger markings were degrading in real time. The cave was sealed to general access almost overnight. Officially, the reason is preservation, plain and simple, and the science backs that up completely. The flint quarried here was traded across huge distances, turning up in tool assemblages hundreds of kilometres from the cave mouth, which tells us how valuable this particular stone was to the people who worked it. Modern visitors are occasionally granted supervised access for research purposes only, wearing full protective suits and breathing apparatus designed to keep human moisture out of the chamber entirely, a level of precaution usually reserved for spacecraft clean rooms rather than tourist caves. But cavers who worked the site before the closure describe side passages that were never fully surveyed, chambers where the flint mining stopped abruptly for no obvious reason, as if the ancient miners had reached something and decided to turn back. Nobody has been allowed in since to check. Even researchers granted supervised access describe it as closer to a museum vault than a natural cave. Every movement logged and every sample catalogued before it leaves, and every research trip scheduled months ahead through a formal ethics and preservation panel rather than a simple permit request. Structure number 2. The Temple of Baal, Ngilgi Caves, New South Wales. Ngilgi is one of the oldest known cave systems on Earth, older than the cave networks of Europe, carved through limestone, laid down beneath an ancient seabed many hundreds of millions of years ago. Most of it is open for guided tours, chandeliers of stone dripping with mineral formations under electric light. But one chamber, mapped in the early 20th century and named for its cathedral-like acoustics, has been closed to the public for most of the last 80 years. The official explanation is structural, a ceiling considered too unstable for regular foot traffic. Ngilgi's broader system includes more than 40 individual caves, and new chambers are still occasionally found by cavers pushing through tight squeezes that nobody has fit through before. The closed chamber sits roughly in the middle of the mapped network, which only deepens the question of why Out of dozens of accessible spaces, this particular one was the one judged too dangerous to keep open, while so many others around it stayed in daily tourist rotation for decades. Engineers who inspected it more recently found the rock more stable than the closure paperwork suggested and recommended a limited reopening that never happened. Local guides still talk about a survey team in the 1950s that mapped a passage leading further down than any known part of the system, then stopped writing notes halfway through the report. Structure number 3. Victoria Fossil Cave, Naracoorte, South Australia. This is one of the richest fossil deposits on the entire planet. A natural pitfall trap that swallowed animals for 500,000 years, preserving the bones of creatures that no longer exist anywhere on Earth. Giant kangaroos, marsupial lions, and wombats the size of small cars. It earned Naracoorte its UNESCO World Heritage status. Excavation here has been running in careful stages since the 1960s, and each new layer keeps pushing the site's significance further back, with some deposits now dated well beyond 170,000 years. Researchers describe the fossil record as essentially a natural time capsule, undisturbed by scavengers or flooding, which is exactly why any new access has to be so tightly controlled, since a single careless footstep could destroy evidence that took the site 500,000 years to build. But the deepest fossil chamber, the one that produced the most complete skeletons, is closed to every visitor except licensed researchers on approved projects. The reason given is conservation, since foot traffic and changing air conditions would damage bones that have survived intact for tens of thousands of years. That reasoning is sound and well documented. What is less discussed is that ground radar surveys in the 2000s picked up at least one additional void beneath the known fossil chamber, a space that has never been excavated, and there is no public timeline for when or if it ever will be. Structure number 4. The additional chamber, Wombeyan Caves, New South Wales. In the 1960s, a rockfall inside one of Wombeyan's show caves exposed a gap that cavers pushed through into a chamber nobody had mapped before. Early notes describe unusually smooth flowstone and formations unlike anything else in the known system. Wombeyan's known caves already include chambers with rare shore formations and helictites twisted in directions that seem to defy gravity, so it is not as though the site lacks impressive geology above the closure line. That makes the missing assessment even harder to explain, purely on budget grounds, since comparable sites with far less unusual formations have received full geological surveys in the same period, while this one has simply sat behind its fence since the Vietnam War was still being fought. The chamber was surveyed once, briefly, then the entrance was fenced off for safety while a full geological assessment was scheduled. That assessment appears never to have happened. Decades later, the fence is still there, the paperwork trail goes cold in 1967, and current cave management staff, when asked, say only that reopening is not currently a priority. For a chamber this scientifically unusual, that is a strange amount of institutional silence. Structure number 5. Royal Arch Cave, Chillagoe, Queensland. Far north, Queensland's limestone towers rise straight out of the savannah like the ruins of a lost city, and underneath them runs one of the most extensive and least studied cave networks in the country. The limestone towers themselves, known locally as the Chillagoe-Mungana Karst Belt, form from an ancient coral reef, more than 400 million years old, long before Australia had separated from the rest of Gondwana. Beneath that reef sits a genuine maze, with well over 600 recorded cave entrances scattered across the wider region, and cavers openly admit that fewer than half of those entrances have ever been properly surveyed end to end. Royal Arch is one of the largest chambers, but several side passages leading off it were closed following a 1989 survey that flagged them as structurally unreliable. Local Iwamian custodians have separately identified sections of the wider Chillagoe system as places requiring cultural protocol, not open discussion for outsiders. The intersection of those two closures, safety and cultural law, means large sections of Chillagoe remain permanently off limits and permanently unexplained to anyone outside the custodial community. Cavers who have mapped the accessible portions describe the karst here as some of the most structurally complex limestone in the country, a honeycomb of interlinked chambers where a single wrong turn can leave a visitor genuinely lost within minutes. Structure number 6. Ngilgi Cave, Yarlingup, Western Australia. To the Wardandi Noongar people, this cave is the site of an ancient battle between spirits, and it has been treated as significant ground for longer than written history exists anywhere on the continent. Tourists today walk a well-lit path through spectacular crystal formations. Above ground, the cave sits inside a nature reserve that draws hundreds of thousands of visitors a year for its wine country and coastline, which makes the quiet firmness of the underground boundary even more striking by comparison. Cave managers work directly with Wardandi representatives to decide what can and cannot be shown. And unlike almost every other site on this list, there is no pending survey, no unresolved paperwork, just a clear line that is held for as long as anyone can document. But deeper sections of the cave, including areas connected to women's cultural business, are closed to all visitors, guided or otherwise, under community protocol rather than government regulation. This is not a mystery in the conspiratorial sense. It is a boundary that predates the question of tourism altogether, maintained not because something is being hidden from science, but because some knowledge was never meant to be public in the first place, and that distinction matters. Structure number 7. Fairy Cave, Buchan, Victoria. Buchan's limestone caves were opened to tourism in the 1890s, among the first show caves in the country, complete with candlelit tours for early visitors. Buchan sits within a broader limestone belt that also produced Royal Cave, its more famous neighbour. And comparisons between the two systems only make Fairy Cave's abrupt 1970 closure look stranger, since Royal Cave has stayed open and heavily toured the entire time, despite similar geology and similar age. A 1970 structural survey closed the innermost chamber of Fairy Cave indefinitely, citing an unstable roof section directly above the main walking path. Engineering reports since then have been inconclusive, some flagging genuine risk, others suggesting the closure was more precautionary than necessary. Cavers, who have seen archival photographs of the closed chamber, describe formations with a faint, reddish tint, not documented anywhere else in the district, though no mineral analysis has ever been published to explain it. What keeps the chamber interesting is a set of unusual mineral deposits noted in early survey photographs, formations that do not match anything else recorded in the wider Buchan system, and that nobody has been back in to properly document since the gate went up more than 50 years ago. Structure number 8. The Bat Colony Tunnels, Undara Lava Tubes, Queensland. Undara formed when a volcano erupted nearly 200,000 years ago, sending rivers of lava racing across the landscape until the surface cooled and hardened, while molten rock kept flowing underneath, leaving behind one of the longest lava tube systems connected to a single eruption on Earth. Rangers estimate that less than a third of the total tube network has been formally mapped, largely because the lava tubes stretch for more than 160 kilometres in total, cutting beneath grazing land, where landholders have occasionally reported sinkholes opening overnight without warning. Several tubes remain sealed, some for straightforward safety reasons, roof collapse zones that make walking underneath genuinely dangerous. Others are closed to protect bent wingbat colonies that roost in total darkness and cannot tolerate light or noise disturbance. That combination, unmapped scale plus active ground collapse, is part of why the closed sections stay closed, even as tourism around the open tubes keeps expanding every year. The two reasons overlap in places, and rangers admit openly that nobody has ever fully mapped where the tube network truly ends, since the unexplored sections are the same sections considered too unsafe or too ecologically sensitive to survey properly. Structure number 9. Exit Cave, Tasmania. Tasmania's largest cave system runs beneath temperate rainforest in the state's remote southwest, and it earned its name because early explorers used it as a route out of the wilderness rather than a destination in itself. In 1996, most public access was closed following concerns about disturbance to fragile cave formations and the endangered cave spider population found nowhere else on the planet. The cave spider, found here, a relic species with a lineage stretching back to Gondwanan rainforest, exists nowhere else that scientists have ever documented, which gives Tasmania's environmental agencies about as strong a conservation case as exists anywhere in the country. That closure is well justified by the ecological evidence. Even so, cavers who worked the site before the closure describe air currents deep in the unexplored leads that suggested a much larger connected system waiting beyond, air that was moving with enough force to blow out a carbide lamp. Less publicised is a 1980 survey that mapped roughly 6 kilometers of passage and noted at least 2 significant leads heading deeper into unexplored territory, leads that have never been followed up because the same access restrictions that protect the cave spiders also keep researchers out. Conservationists involved in the closure openly admit the trade-off, that protecting the spider almost certainly means the rest of Exit Cave's deepest sections will stay unmapped for a generation or more, and they consider that an acceptable price to pay. Structure number 10, Cathedral Cave, Mount Etna Caves, Queensland. This cave holds one of the largest bat colonies in the southern hemisphere, hundreds of thousands of little bent-wing bats using it as critical maternity habitat each summer. Public access has been almost entirely closed since the 1980s, specifically to protect that colony from disturbance during breeding season, a conservation decision credited with helping the species recover from serious decline. The bat colony's recovery has become something of a conservation success story, cited in state biodiversity reports as proof that strict, unglamorous access limits can actually work when enforced consistently over decades, rather than abandoned after a few years. It is one of the clearest cases on this list where the sealed door really is exactly what it claims to be. Even conservation groups who support the closure completely still note, almost as an aside, that the unsurveyed passage marked on those old maps has simply never come up for discussion since, protected less by mystery than by nobody having a reason to ask. The twist is smaller, but still strange. Early survey maps from before the closure show a passage marked simply as unsurveyed, extending well past the mapped bat roosting area, and it has stayed unsurveyed for over 40 years since. Structure number 11, Bushrangers Cave, Abercrombie Caves, New South Wales. This cave earned its name honestly, since it was reportedly used as a hideout by colonial-era bushrangers escaping pursuit through the limestone gorge country west of Sydney. The main arch alone stretches over 200 metres and reaches heights of 30 metres in places, making it one of the most photographed natural formations in inland New South Wales, which only makes the neglected inner chamber feel more like an afterthought than a genuine secret. A smaller inner chamber, however, was fenced off in the 1970s after a partial roof collapse, and repeated proposals to clear and reopen it have stalled for budgetary reasons every single time. Heritage officers have flagged the site for a stabilisation grant at least 3 separate times since the 1990s, and each application has stalled at the funding stage rather than the engineering stage. Locals joke that the real reason nobody reopens it is that nobody wants to be the one who finally finds out whether the rest of the ceiling is coming down too, and after 50 years of deferred maintenance, that joke is not entirely a joke. Structure number 12, Cutta Cutta Caves, Northern Territory, south of Catherine Town. This dolomite cave system floods almost fully during the wet season and closes to visitors for months at a time as a result, a closure driven by nothing more mysterious than monsoon rainfall and rising water tables. The wet season flooding adds an entirely separate practical hazard, since water levels inside the cave can rise several metres within hours during a heavy monsoon system, turning a walking tour route into a genuine flash flood risk without much warning at all. But Cutta Cutta is also critical hibernation habitat for the ghost bat, Australia's only carnivorous bat species, and a portion of the cave stays closed year-round to protect that colony regardless of season. Ghost bats are apex predators among Australian bats, hunting birds, frogs, and even other small bats, right in complete darkness, using echolocation alone, which makes their colony here one of the more scientifically significant reasons for closure on this entire list. Beyond the section, open to tourists, lies a stretch the traditional custodians associate with the rainbow serpent, Nabarlgu, treated as significant ground under law that predates any government cave management plan by tens of thousands of years, and closed on those terms permanently, not temporarily. Rangers here brief every visitor on both restrictions before a tour begins, treating the ecological rule and the cultural rule as equally non-negotiable. 12 caves, 12 gates, and not one single conspiracy that actually holds up under scrutiny. Most of what keeps these places closed is exactly what the signage says it is: unstable rock, fragile ecosystems, cultural law, older than the nation that put up the fence. That is the honest answer, and it deserves to be treated as the honest answer. It is worth sitting with the shape of that list for a second. Cultural law shows up as often as engineering risk. Ecology shows up as often as bureaucracy. And in a country this old, those categories were never really separate anyway, since the people who have lived here the longest have always understood the ground itself as something with memory, not just material to be mapped and mined. But run your eye back down that list, and a pattern is hard to ignore. Nearly every one of these 12 sites has, somewhere in its history, a survey that got cut short, a passage flagged for further study that was never studied further, a recommendation that quietly disappeared into a filing cabinet instead of a follow-up visit. None of that proves anything hidden underground. It mostly proves something much more mundane, and in its own way, more interesting, that Australia is dotted with cave systems so extensive, so remote, and so expensive to properly survey, that even without any conspiracy at all, huge sections of the continent's deep underground remain functionally unknown, which means the honest ending here is not a reveal. It is an open door. Somewhere under the plains and ranges of this country, there are passages nobody alive has ever walked, not because anyone is stopping them, but because nobody has gotten around to it yet. Maybe that is more unsettling than a cover-up would be. Maybe it is just how big, old, and genuinely underexplored this empty country actually still is, even now.